Deep in Kane stirred the spirit of the crusader, the fire of the zealot, the fanatic who devotes his life to battling the powers of darkness. "Let us eat," said he. "Then we will build a great fire at the cave mouth. The fire which keeps away beasts shall also keep away fiends." Later, Kane sat just inside the cave, chin rested on clenched fist, eyes gazing unseeingly into the fire. Behind, in the shadows, Zuna watched him, awed. "God of hosts," Kane muttered, "grant me aid. My hand it is which must lift the ancient curse from this dark land. How am I to fight these dead fiends, who yield not to mortal weapons? Fire will destroy them. A broken neck renders them helpless. The voodoo stave thrust through them crumbles them to dust. But of what avail? How may I prevail against the hundreds who haunt these hills, and to whom human life essence is life? Have not, as Zuna says, warriors come against them in the past, only to find them fled to their high-walled city, where no man can come against them?" That is from The Hills of the Dead, one of the greatest stories of Solomon Kane, Robert E. Howard's Solomon Kane. Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughan Manor and the Robert E. Howard Show. Yes, it is the Robert E. Howard Show once again, where we are currently going through the stories of Solomon Kane, which can be found in this book, The Savage Tales of Solomon Kane. And this week we're talking about a really good story. This story was originally published by Weird Tales in August 1930. And so in this story, Solomon Kane once again is in Africa. He has returned to Africa. So between last week we talked about the story, The Moon of Skulls, which was, it was okay. It was a decent story, but there was nothing spectacular about it. So in this book, after The Moon of Skulls, there is a poem called One Black Stain. After the poem, there is a story called The Blue Flame of Vengeance. This story was not published during Robert E. Howard's lifetime. It's understandable why it was not published, because it is basically a pirate story. It's an adventure story starring Solomon Kane, but there's no supernatural element in the story at all. It's just an adventure story. As an adventure story, it's decent. It's okay. You know, the writing is really good, as it always is in a Robert E. Howard story. But the story itself, you know, there was nothing to write home about. And since there was no supernatural element in it at all, it didn't feel like a Robert E. Howard story. Or excuse me, it didn't feel like a Solomon Kane story. The next story, though, The Hills of the Dead. The Hills of the Dead feels very much like a Solomon Kane story. It is one of the best Solomon Kane stories. And like I said, here Solomon Kane has returned to Africa. The next few adventures that he has are in Africa. His final adventures, basically, all take place in Africa. He's been driven to return to Africa. He has these compulsions, Solomon Kane does. And believing as he does that his compulsions come from God, he feels drawn to follow them, because that's what he does. So he's been compelled to return to Africa. So at the beginning of this story, he's hanging out with Nalonga, who we last saw in Red Shadows. Nalonga, the wizard, the African wizard, who can send his spirit into other bodies, including the bodies of the dead, and thus raise the dead. He was a kind of scary character in Red Shadows, even though he basically, well, he did. He saved Solomon Kane's life in Red Shadows. you would think at the end of that story that Solomon Kane wouldn't come back to that village, but he does. And he comes back, and in the beginning of this story, he's hanging out with Nalonga talking. And something happened between that story and this one. There feels like there's a missing episode, a missing story. Too bad we don't have it, but something happened between that time, because throughout this story, not only is Solomon Kane's attitude towards Nalonga completely different, he refers to Nalonga as his blood brother. So their relationship has moved to a different level. They are good friends at this point. At least they trust each other. Solomon Kane trusts Nalonga. Nalonga still kind of freaks him out, but his attitude towards him has changed. In fact, his attitude towards Africans seems to have changed, or at least is changing. For the next few adventures, he's in Africa. He's basically going to be, in the next few adventures, the only white guy in Africa. And so the African characters are actually pretty well done for a Robert E. Howard story, for a story that was written in this time period. They're not viewed as inferior. Their otherness, they're not quite as other as they were in the beginning of this book. And Solomon Kane's attitude towards them is changing. He's changing as a character. By the end of this book, he's a different guy, really, than he was at the beginning of this book. He's dealing with Nalonga, who has this scary magic. And he also accepts from Nalonga what he refers to as the voodoo staff, which is this staff right here. This is the staff of Solomon, the staff of the original Solomon. This is an ancient magic staff. It's got a cat head on it. But we are told that originally it could have been something very different that was transformed into the head of a cat from something else. Now this staff, like I said, has magical powers. Nalonga gives Solomon Kane this staff because Solomon Kane is determined to venture into the jungles of Africa, into territory that no European has gone before. And that's going to be pretty dangerous. So Nalonga, to help him out, gives him this staff. And he tells him, hey, if you need to contact me, you can contact me through this staff. If you need my help, you let me know through this staff. You know, you just lie down with it at night on your chest, and I will appear to you in your dream. Which is kind of creepy in itself, but, you know, he's helping out, Nalonga is. So Solomon Kane ventures out, and he comes across a young native woman who's being chased by a lion. Solomon Kane has his guns, he takes care of the lion, but she's got other problems because this area, as it turned out, is completely infested with supernatural monsters. Basically, these are the hills of the dead that he is venturing into. This area is infested with undead monsters. Solomon Kane refers to them as vampires, but they're unlike the vampires we normally come across. They're more like zombies. They act, they behave, they seem more like zombies, but they do want to suck out your life essence. So, you know, basically they are vampires of a sort. They're a very different kind of creature. Very creepy, these monsters. Solomon Kane runs into them at one point before he knows what they are. And he is able to dispatch them using his voodoo staff, his staff of Solomon. Because the staff of Solomon will kill them. It's the only thing that'll kill them. As he mentioned in that part that I read, if you break their neck, you can render them useless. They basically will be crippled. Or if you throw them in the fire or catch them on fire, they'll burn. But there are thousands of them in these hills. So, you know, he can't go up against all of these creatures. Can he? And they have a whole city. And while they live in caves in the hills, when they want to retreat from danger, apparently they go down to their city, this ancient stone, creepy city. So when the warriors went against them before, they retreated into the city and they could defend themselves there. So they've never been defeated, these creepy undead creatures, and they just prey on whoever wanders into these hills. Solomon Kane, being who he is, he feels like, I have to take care of these monsters, but, you know, what do? I'm one guy. So he does call on Nalonga for help from a distance. And what he does is he gets this young native woman to go get her boyfriend. And Nalonga tells him to do this. To get your boyfriend and bring him back here. So she does. And Nalonga proceeds to take over his body with Nalonga's spirit. So Nalonga takes over this young guy's body. He's only borrowing it. As he points out to Solomon Kane, you know, I'm not an evil guy. If I was, I could take this body as my own. I'm an old, feeble man. And if I wanted to, I could just take this body and use it, and it would be my new body, but I'm not going to do that because I'm not evil. So, but he does have to borrow it for a while, and actually subject it to great danger. Because Nalonga and Solomon Kane do go up against this army of vampire zombie creatures. And it's fantastic. There's a great battle scene where Solomon Kane has to beat off all of these monsters and try to keep himself from being killed. It's a great scene. I will not give away the ending because it's a pretty good one. There's a pretty good ending in this. And it's an excellent horror story. I think it's one of his best horror stories. A great old pulp horror story. It's fun to see Nalonga again and to get a little more insight into his character. It's interesting to see how Solomon Kane and Nalonga's relationship has changed. And it's interesting to see the beginning of Solomon Kane's change in attitude towards the Africans and just the different way in which the Africans are presented. In the next story, Wings in the Night, that's the next story I'll be talking about. That is really good, and then the changes are even further progress. They progress even further in Wings in the Night. It's a very different type of story. Another great horror story, even better than Hills of the Dead. And we see Solomon Kane's attitude is just very different. And next week's story is just a really interesting look into Solomon Kane's character. And like I said, all the other African characters that show up in that story are very well drawn. They're good characters. There's nothing inferior about them. And so that's nice to see. It's nice to see that has progressed to that point in this volume, because it wasn't like that in Red Shadows, that's for sure. Yeah, so that was Hills of the Dead. Hope you liked it. I'll stop yammering on now. But really, really good story. It's one of the high points of this volume. I have to say, the Solomon Kane stories, for the most part, did get better towards the end. The last 3 stories were really, really good ones. So, there you go. Hills of the Dead. I will catch you next week for Wings in the Night. Okay, guys, I will catch you next time.